This podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our DC Tourist tier, which includes exclusive access to the monthly spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, where we apply the signature digging for kryptonite approach to the rest of the DC universe. Sign up today, and thank you to all patrons. In the 1950s, George Reeves embodied the Man of Steel in Superman's first television adaptation. From its gritty black and white beginnings to the kid-friendly color years, to this day, an entire generation reveres George as their Superman, while for others, the show remains an overlooked chapter in the character's mythology. On this podcast, we bring everyone together as we break down each episode of Adventures of Superman. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 2, Episode 12, Panic in the Sky, is returning guest Rich Roney. Welcome.
Hey, great to be here. I mean, it's kind of surreal. It's deja vu. I was here a couple of weeks ago, and we covered The Face and the Voice. And this again, oh my God, these two episodes you're giving me the privilege to discuss are my favorite out of the whole series.
Well, you've been with me on this ride since I started delving into Adventures of Superman, before I even did this podcast, and the conversations that you and I have had about George Reeves and this take on Superman and specific episodes, those conversations have so furthered my interest, my enthusiasm. So I'm honored to have you here to do what is widely considered the best episode of Adventures of Superman. This aired on December 5th, 1953, written by Jackson Gillis, directed by Tommy Carr. And our brief synopsis, because we're going to go through this entire thing. Superman loses his memory while trying to prevent an asteroid from colliding with Earth and must remember who he is in time to stop the asteroid once and for all. It guest stars Jonathan Hale as Professor Roberts, long career, including an appearance in Season 1 as Colonel Brand in The Evil Three. So a very different type of character here as he plays the astronomer who's guiding Superman. And we have a comment really from one of our patrons that I think will kind of tee us up here for the discussion that we're going to have. Mike Thomas says, "This episode deserves its widely recognized status as the best of the series. The scope and scale of the episode is cinematic. Superman goes through a journey and has to relearn his identity and powers, and the stakes are higher than any other episode. The whole world is in danger. I think this story would have made a great movie in the Christopher Reeve era." What do you think?
That's spot on. I mean, I was processing everything he said. He's absolutely right. Okay, and you know what a huge fan I am. But this is the first time there was a challenge, something worthy of Superman's powers, right? And there was the consequences were so huge. All of the Season 1 stuff was really him fighting gangsters and criminals. This was really a potential disaster. So it was something that is on the scale of you'd need Superman to save Earth.
Yeah, to Mike's point, the scope and scale are greater than anything we've seen before. This is a global extinction level event that they're facing. So this is a challenge unlike we, the audience, or this version of Superman have seen before. So in that sense, we're really in this whole other realm, and it does elevate the tension in the proceedings, and you feel like you're watching something different. This is not a run-of-the-mill episode. We'll get to it, but you see Superman flying in space, right? It has a whole other feel to it. So there's that grand scale, but then, and I think why this episode has received the acclaim that it has, is that personal journey to, as Mike put it, relearn his identity and his powers, right? There's a very personal struggle that he goes through to figure out who he is. And hand in hand with our discussion about The Face and the Voice from a few weeks ago, that's the kind of thing that I'm always looking for in this show. And a lot of episodes are not made for that, but this one is, and it delivers. Now, when we talked about The Face and the Voice, we discussed how maybe that's the best episode of the series. I mean, it was so strong. We had such a great conversation about it. I mean, now that you've gone through the process of rewatching Panic in the Sky, as I have as well. I mean, how are you feeling right now at this point? Because again, I'm saying it, Mike's saying, it's the best of the series. Do you look at Panic in the Sky as the best of the series?
Boy, it's the coward's way out. I mean, the two of them, every time I think about one, I can see something in it that, wow, that is so well done. Now, I think the two of them are such a tie. What I do find tremendously appealing about this, when we were here 2 weeks ago, it was more of a comedic touch, lighthearted comedy. It let Reeves stretch his acting muscles. Here, there's a scene in here that I am gonna just pound, in terms of his acting prowess. But the drama here, the consequences. I did hear at one point in time, Jack Larson did a commercial or did something with Jerry Seinfeld.
Yes. And
Jerry Seinfeld invited him into his trailer, and they watched this very episode.
Yeah, there's actually, on the DVDs, there's a commentary track with Jack Larson and Noel Neill for this episode, and really? Jack talked about that exactly. So yes, really? Apparently this is Jerry Seinfeld's favorite episode of the series. And this is not a knock, but when we talk about best of the series, I think one of the things that I come back to, and this doesn't necessarily need to be the test for best of the series, but at the same time, this is not representative of
good point
the typical Adventures of Superman episode. And maybe that's why for a lot of people it's like, oh, it's the best, like, because it's different and he's in space and the stakes are so high. Whereas I look at something like The Face and the Voice, and that feels like what the show generally was, but done to the highest level. So there is something to me where you could give someone The Face and the Voice and be like, hey, if you like that, you're probably going to like a lot of these other episodes. Whereas if you give Panic in the Sky to someone,
this is unique.
This is very much an outlier. Again, it's not a criticism, but when we're talking about like the best of the series, if the test for it is representation of the series as a whole, this isn't really that.
This is unique. It's something, and I'm racking my mind and my memory. Most of these for season 1 and then for seasons, 3, 4, 5, 6 were Superman fighting gangsters. There was no recurring villain. This, the planet, the Earth was in jeopardy. He made a huge sacrifice, and we saw how it really, really messed him up and how he had to work to regain his memory and that whole journey. So the drama was powerful, the consequences. But the thing that also impressed me is so much of Superman, they would recycle special effects. We would see him flying. We would see him run to the stockroom, jump out the window. Here, this, to the best of my knowledge, this is the only time they had these special effects where of the meteorite or the asteroid and Superman flying in space. So for them, with their frugal, tight budget, they did some very inventive stuff.
Yeah, apparently this was the second most expensive of the series, second most expensive episode of the entire series after Superman and the Mole Men. And, you see it here. But yeah, not only is the threat so great, but the fact that, the threat to Earth is so great, but the threat to Superman, right? This is a pretty singular instance. Yes, we've dealt with kryptonite, but a pretty singular instance where he really doesn't know if he can do this, but he has to try anyway. Just a chance, as the line goes. Just a chance. That's all it is. And that, again, I can see why this episode has resonated with us and with so many fans, because I think that taps into one of the most foundational, elemental qualities of the character, that he'll try. He'll always try. It's about what you do. It's about action. And regardless of whether or not he'll succeed, he doesn't know if he'll succeed, but he still has to try, and he does.
Amen. Well, you said that, and that's so spot on, right? One thing that really struck me about this is it showed Superman, the hero. He was going to take this action to protect people. And there was even consequences both when he did the first collision with the asteroid, and then even the second time. They weren't sure if he'd survive either of those encounters. So the fact that he was willing to sacrifice was just powerful. It's such a quality product. It's such a great drama. I can understand why people would call this number one.
Not only why it would be called number one, but why we've seen this tale spun so many different times. So, a few years ago, the most recent iteration of A Star is Born was released, this time with Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga. Now, at the time, I was unaware of the long history of versions of that movie, and I educated myself. But, in a way, A Panic in the Sky kind of reminds me of that, because the broad strokes of it are pretty timeless, and I don't say this in a negative way, but general, just like with A Star is Born. And so it's like, okay, you have a young star who breaks in and mentored by this, this more established star who has a lot of problems, and they have a relationship and it goes off the rails. Similarly here, the broad beats of this: asteroid on a course with Earth, Superman has to try to stop it, loses his memory, has to relearn who he is and save the day. There's something that kind of, you can spin it in so many different ways. It's not so tied to any particular character or time period or anything. It works in all of these different versions,
I agree.
And speaking of that, so on the comic book side, there was The Menace from the Stars in World's Finest number 68 in 1954. But, and we can talk about that if you'd like. Yes.
Actually, what I found interesting, that issue 68, that was sold on the newsstands November 11th, even though it had a cover date. So it was just about 3 weeks away from the TV show being broadcast.
Gotcha.
Really close in time.
I know, because and we've touched on this here and there. I know we haven't delved so deeply into this, but this era, and with Whitney Ellsworth, given his role with the comics and the TV show, I know there was a high level of coordination.
Yeah, I read somewhere when Whitney Ellsworth, and I forget who the other fellow was, took a train from New York to California for season 2. Apparently, they wrote like 30 episodes, or they outlined 30 episodes. And then Whitney Ellsworth came back, or Mort Weisinger came back to New York, said, well, hell, I got 30 issues I got to fill. So there was the Bully of Dry Gulch. There were many, many, many stories that appeared both in the comic and on the TV show. And
gotcha. So yeah, like Menace from the Stars, that was more something that was hand in hand. But as far as subsequent remakes or reinterpretations of this, there's the episode Superboy Lost in 1990 from the Superboy television series, and then the episode All Shook Up in 1994 from Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. Now, I know you, and I really appreciate, I didn't ask Rich to do this, but I appreciate you went out, you bought season 3 of the Superboy television show so that you could watch the Superboy Lost episode. Now, obviously, we haven't gone through Panic in the Sky fully yet, but I do want to kind of touch on these other tellings. What was your reaction to Superboy Lost?
Okay, so it was very much of its time, right? It was really late 80s, early 90s. So the quality of the show, you can really tell. It was a half an hour TV show that was in syndication. But I applaud what they did. Like you said, the beats were the same. The unique
mostly.
Well, the unique feature here was, and could we go through the George Reeves episode first and then at the end because there's one plot point where I could see the TV show veering right into what Superboy Lost did.
Sure, we can circle back to it. What I'll just kind of say at the outset is that, because I watched Superboy Lost, and funny enough, the timing of this dovetailed perfectly, because over on my other podcast, Digging for Kryptonite, we are deep into Superboy coverage across time and media. And for months now, I've been making my way through the Superboy TV series in anticipation of covering it on Digging for Kryptonite. And I was only a few episodes behind Superboy Lost when it came time to watch it. So I did skip ahead to watch Superboy Lost, but I wasn't far off from that. So the timing worked out really nicely. So I've really been immersing myself in that series. And I watched that, and then I also watched, and I know you didn't, and I didn't ask you to, but I also rewatched the All Shook Up episode from Lois and Clark. And what I'll just say is that the Superboy take on it didn't follow that beat, that those beats that we talked about, nearly to the extent that the Lois and Clark episode did. The Lois and Clark installment was a far more quote unquote faithful kind of take on Panic in the Sky, but modified, of course, for that show and its cast and that time period. And I'll talk about this more later, but you have the whole added dynamic of Jonathan and Martha and the role that they play in Clark figuring everything out. So you have that there. The Superboy episode, again, well, we can talk about it more later, but essentially you lose that core piece of the asteroid still being a threat.
That's a good point.
And putting a ticking clock on it. So in that episode, you start with Superboy going into space to stop this asteroid. So we don't have any of this business about him on the ground trying to figure anything out. You just start with him in space and succeeds, and then lands on Earth without his memory and is taken in by this woman and her son who are living off the grid because they're trying to hide from her, the abusive father of this kid. And so he just kind of starts this life with them and has to protect them, and eventually his memory returns. And while all of this is going on, you have Lana back at the bureau, wondering where Superboy is and worrying about him. So again, it taps into the most kind of fundamental idea from Panic in the Sky, but it doesn't track as closely. And I don't think it really even comes close to reaching the levels of certainly a Panic in the Sky, but even of something like All Shook Up, which really just went all in on retelling and updating the story. So,
gotcha.
And we could circle back to that. One other thing just to mention, and this came up in our Jet Ace episode when we had Mike Carlin here, but he specifically took this title and used it for the early 90s Triangle era storyline, Panic in the Sky, with Brainiac attacking. So that's a cool, cool legacy aspect of all of this. All right, shall we get into our scene-by-scene discussion of Panic in the Sky?
Sounds good.
All right. So we open on the crowd of people in the streets of Metropolis looking up worriedly to the sky out in front of Dick's Meat Market there. And then we move over to Lois and Jimmy and then Perry in the Daily Planet office looking out the window. And I got to say, I thought this was such an effective and cost-effective way of introducing this story and doing it in a way where just by focusing on their worried looks up to the heavens, it conveyed so much while showing you very little, but it accomplished what it needed to, right? Like you felt the tension right away.
Yes. No. Well said. I didn't appreciate that till you just said it, right? And now that I reflect back, the opening scene is like a big lamppost and it pans down to the crowd and they're all looking up, probably about 15 or 20 people. And it cuts over to I guess I'm assuming the grocer and his wife, and they're nervous. And then it shifts to, I always thought that was Clark's office. They were looking out his window because from Czar of the Underworld, we do remember that's where the sniper tried to take out Clark. But you see the danger and the jeopardy and the risk through the eyes of the people. So they use drama to connote the jeopardy, and they really didn't have to hurt themselves with special effects at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It was a very effective way to convey that. And yeah, there is that brief exchange between, I guess, the grocer and his wife about, it's just a meteor. But, there's a lot of concern about what all of this means. And then we get more information as we're in the office with Lois and Perry and Jimmy talking about the measurements that Perry has received from the astronomers.
5.25 miles in diameter or something like that.
Yeah, this is no meteor as they've all been thinking. It's an asteroid, a king-size meteor, right? That is potentially on this collision course. And there's this question about where Clark is.
And Lois, God bless her, has to get her dig in.
Yeah.
Everyone's hyper and nervous. And somebody says, where's Clark? Oh, I bet he's gone in the Lois, hiding in a cellar somewhere. And then Jimmy glares at her or, gives her a look and she goes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that.
I know, which I like that. I like that. And you can understand, again, certainly how heightened everything is and how worried they are. And look, I've cited that line a bunch of times when we talk about, is that line justified? Is it justified all the other times they make cracks about Clark being a coward, in contrast to all the things we've seen, but especially in season 2, and we've talked about them, there have been enough instances where we've seen Clark, pretend to be scared or pretend to be nervous. It's not the defining quality of his character, a la the Christopher Reeve iteration, where he's always that bumbling, toast. Right? But there are isolated instances where Clark plays into that, and I can buy it well enough. Yeah. I also liked here where, and I know I've been a little hard on the Noel Neal version of Lois here, but what I liked here was she says to Perry, like, well, should we get out an extra edition about the measurements? And he's basically like, why bother?
Well, he struck me then, and we have a lot to talk about Perry in this episode. But he did seem to me as like, look, I'm the battle-scarred, experienced journalistic veteran. Why do an extra edition? Let's just do it tomorrow morning. I thought that was more pragmatism from his standpoint.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know. I guess my read on it was more almost like resignation, but I like your read on it. But either way, my appreciation for Lois in that scene remains, because I just kind of liked it. That felt very Lois, of just focus on the task at hand, what we can control. Like, let's not just sit here and worry. Like, let's try to get out an edition. I like that.
Yeah. I would have preferred the season 1 Lois.
We all would, Rich.
Okay, sorry.
We all would. But this is the Lois we have. Okay. So we take what we can get. So now we cut over to the observatory. And do you happen to know offhand what the actual observatory, where it was that they used with these samples?
Sonoma?
Yes,
California?
Because I had it and then it slipped my mind. Sonoma. So thank you.
At first I thought it was the Griffin or the Griffiths in Los Angeles, but it's Sonoma.
So this is where we see Professor Roberts, and he has this conversation out on the deck with Superman about this asteroid essentially being on this collision course with Earth. So,
and it was impressive because seconds before he steps out on the deck, he's looking at it through the telescope. And then he comes out and he's Superman, and over here, Professor, I'm watching it. And he goes, you're probably seeing it better with your eyes than we would through the telescope. Something like that.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I want to mention here, because I don't want to forget, the music in this episode was tremendous.
Very synergistic.
Yeah, I mean, it went such a long way, especially, look, like we said, there are instances where they went all out to the extent that they could with the special effects, and we appreciate it. But there's also a lot that they relied on, again, those crowd reaction shots or the music. And the music did not disappoint. It really helped sell how epic all of this was.
It enhanced, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. This was one episode I was conscious of the music.
Yeah. And it's one of these things where, again, I think, like we said, why this story keeps getting told over multiple adaptations is that, again, just kind of the simplicity and purity of it. It's like he literally just has to go up and try to hit it. Like, I know when we get to the end of the episode, there's the bomb to detonate, but right now at this point, it's really just, I got to fly at this thing.
And to your point, Professor Roberts kind of coaches him going, hey, slow down. There could be unusual elements in this, and there's things that could affect you. Maybe there's kryptonite in here. So he's kind of going, hey, let's go slow on this. But then once Superman hears that it's on a collision course, he's jumping. He's ready to go right at it and protect Earth.
Yeah, and I liked that bit about we don't know what this contains, and there could be kryptonite, because it adds this whole other level of danger and tension. And they didn't need to do that, because simply the size and force and magnitude of this could have been enough. Like, that in and of itself could have been sufficient to raise the stakes and raise the danger.
This just amplified.
Yeah.
There's even more risk, because there could be elements that could be lethal to him, irrespective of the size and the ballistic force and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really thought that was cool. A couple of connection points to other episodes. So there's the Deadly Rock episode from the Color seasons that we're going to get to eventually on the podcast. And there is a payoff to the kryptonite in this asteroid where it's found and plays into that episode. And I also want to say, not too long ago, we covered the episode, The Defeat of Superman, which introduced kryptonite on this show. And at the end of that episode, the kryptonite, the synthetic kryptonite that's created there, is encased in a lead pipe, and Superman throws it. And after we did that episode, I had a few folks reach out, and very nicely, which I appreciate, give me the heads up that that specific bit of kryptonite in that lead pipe comes back in the season 3 episode Superman Week, which I was not aware of when we recorded, but now I've been tipped off to it and I'm looking forward to it. And thank you to those folks who let me know about that. So again, just wanted to mention this business about kryptonite and some of these connection points here.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we have now this conversation that we were addressing earlier about there are all these potential risks, and Superman's like, well, it's just a chance we'll have to take. And he flies off, and it's such a great takeoff.
Oh, not just if I may, and I think I said this earlier. The special effects here are unique to this episode only. I watched it a couple of times. The special effects to show the asteroid. You know, granted, it was such limited technology. It was probably some B-serial stuff from Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers. But it was so suitable for this episode. So, and you could, they dangled it, but it did look like a giant, planetoid coming at us. But then to see Superman fly at the angle that he did, and to have stars as the background, leave the clouds. And I was just very impressed with the special effects, how they enhanced this episode, and were just really, really connected for this episode.
Totally. I mean, the shots that we get of the asteroid combined with, like we said, those reaction shots, the lighting, the music, it just sells it. And then to your point, when he's flying, it's a longer flight than usual at a steeper angle. And then you see him in space.
We've never seen that.
Do we ever see that again?
No, and I think you and I spoke about this, the episode with Hadley. There was unique features of Superman lifting the plane and flying the plane. But I've watched this since I was 5 and 6 years old. I've never seen him fly in space in The Adventures of Superman with George Reeves. So to their credit, and you said this was the second most well-funded or cost-effective from a budget standpoint, kudos to them to really put a quality product out there.
Yeah, and we mentioned the Superboy and Lois and Clark episodes from the early 90s. Now, you might figure, well, by the 90s, the effects had improved so much, it probably looked a lot better when Superman or Superboy was going up against the asteroid. I guess, but not by much. Not by much. I mean, those effects in the early 90s for those shows were still pretty crude. To the point where I would say when you look at that trio, the Adventures of Superman version still holds up pretty well.
That's cool. That's so cool.
Now again, compared to what they would do now on Superman and Lois, for example, yeah, sure, it's a different game, but they're not as divergent in terms of the quality of the effects. They're different, but in terms of the level of quality and believability, yes, here you can see the wires as, as Chris is flying towards it. But
who directed this?
This was Tommy Carr.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I believe I said that at the top, but if not, again, written by Jackson Gillis, directed by Tommy Carr. So,
you probably did it, and I was thinking of something.
Stalwart of the show and really delivered on this. But no, the effects, and again, I think the fact that it was different, it was exciting, right? Even if you can see, the wire as he's flying towards it, you can still you get buy into it.
Well said.
And then we get a cartoon explosion, which again, they did what they had to do, but it does stand out. That felt kind of reminiscent of, I don't know, a little shades of the Kirk Allen serials, right? Where he was rendered as a cartoon when he was flying,
Okay. I thought you were going to say the Fleischer things.
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the actual explosion itself, yes. Yeah. It did kind of have that vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even, now going back to Superman on Earth, the explosion of Krypton. Did they do that? It's funny. We talked about it, but I can't remember offhand exactly how they rendered
I'm
that.
drawing a blank.
Yeah. That's okay.
Drawing a blank.
But in any event, we get kind of this cartoon explosion. And, relieved reaction shots from the people here. But, we could tell Professor Roberts.
They're cheering. Yeah.
But Professor Roberts at the observatory, he's not so quick to kind of throw a party here. His colleague is, though, right? There's this theory that's floated very early that as they can see, right, the asteroid is not obliterated.
It's in a fixed orbit now.
But it's been stopped. And the idea is that, okay, it's just going to settle into an orbit and it'll just become like a second moon. And that guy in particular is just, he's all on board with that. He's fine. This is great. Crisis over. Obviously, we know that won't be the case. But even from that early point, we see Professor Roberts is not totally sold on this. And there's more to come on that front.
Right.
And then we have Superman landing, right? As opposed to, for example, the Lois and Clark episode where he crashes like a shooting star in Metropolis. Here, he's able to land. You know, what's interesting here is that it's not like, again, he just crashes to the ground and has no memory. It's a gradual, the amnesia is kind of like gradually onset where he lands and maybe this is just reflex instinct. He knows enough to kind of run behind a boulder and change to Clark.
Right. I would also say what impressed me in this is he lands, but he's had the snot beaten out of him. He's fatigued.
Just very disoriented.
He did a very good job of showing the confusion and just how mentally he was whacked out. You could see incrementally he was getting more and more confused, but he almost, like you said, operated on reflex and sneaks behind the boulder and changes to Clark. But when he hit the ground, you could see he was kind of wobbly, and even his face showed just the fatigue and the exhaustion.
This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show, too. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we'll see this continue to play out over multiple scenes, especially when he gets back to his apartment there most of all. But yeah, I mean, he did a great job of conveying that pain, the disorientation of all of this.
And he was also exhausted, depleted, no energy. I mean, to me, he was just like basically almost unconscious on his feet.
The show has never addressed this thus far. I don't know if it does in any subsequent episode. Are we to assume that he has his Clark clothes in a pouch in his cape?
That's my assumption, but I took that from being a child reading Silver Age books in the 60s, that there was this pouch that could really hold a lot, or he would compress his clothes into a. So I made the leap that this was consistent with the Silver Age comics of the 1960s.
I think we have to kind of fill that in, and that works here. We'll talk more about the costume, because there's some stuff to kind of unpack here.
We're gonna touch on our other costume episode,
especially compared to other costume, not just the stolen costume, but even going back to Superman on Earth. But we'll get there. So Clark now emerges from behind this boulder and is picked up by this woman driving by, and she offers to give him a ride. And again, he's disoriented. He doesn't know who Superman is, or the fact that they all just narrowly averted an extinction level event, and she kind of chastises him a little bit, like, "Oh, it's no big deal for you to survive this."
She's disdainful. Now, apparently, that actress had appeared in a lot of 1950s westerns. Now, I'm going to steal a minute and tell a personal history on this. First time I ever saw parts of this episode, when I was one day in the summer when I was in college. I'd never seen this growing up as a child in Chicago. Never. And I can remember being at my parents' house, and we had to go somewhere, my brother and I. But I saw this episode up to the very point where he gets into the car, the jalopy, with this woman. And I really thought, oh, are they going to do something where he's something almost similar to what they did in Superboy? So I saw them drive away, and then I had to leave. So I didn't watch this episode in its entirety later until like 5-6 years ago when we started dissecting some of the George Reeves things. So years and years I didn't see it. But I thought it would have taken a different route, because for the black and white shows of the 50s and 60s, they frequently did a plot thing where the hero would get amnesia or the hero would be blind. And there'd be one episode, like Hawaii Five-0 had it, Mannix, certain Westerns, where for one episode they'd either be amnesiac or blind, and they'd work through. So I thought she might have driven him somewhere and then had to help rehabilitate him.
It's funny. I wonder if the Superboy writers
said, hey,
we're kind of like, had a similar thought of like, oh, what if this woman had just taken Clark somewhere else, not back to his apartment? Because that's essentially what the Superboy episode is. I would say that the two main points of divergence, one is that the asteroid crisis is just fully averted. It's not like he has to regain his memory in time to finish off the asteroid. And I think even more importantly is the fact that it's not about Superboy being missing and Clark being back in his old life but not knowing anything and needing to figure out that he's Superboy. That aspect comes into play, but it's in the context of he's living with this woman and her son off the grid, out in the woods in this cabin in the middle of nowhere, helping them with their problem. Like just essentially being inserted into this whole other world and other life, and then realizing, okay, no, I'm actually Superboy. I got to go. So as opposed to, again, this and what we see in Lois and Clark, where it's very much Clark is found and doesn't have any memory and is going through the motions and the routine, being at the Daily Planet, being surrounded by people, not knowing anything, and everyone saying, where the hell is Superman? And of course, not recognizing, hey, Clark has amnesia at the same time. No one can find Superman.
Right.
But anyway, just when we look at those adaptations, that was, I think, big picture, the biggest thing that really kind of stood out to me. So he gets in the car and gets this ride here. And then back at the Daily Planet, Perry's on the phone with the astronomer, with the mayor. There's this big reception plan for Superman, but Superman's not back yet. And Perry and Lois are talking, he's not there. I think at this point, Perry says, well, get Kent. He can usually find Superman. He's like, he's not back either.
Yeah. Correct.
Right. So we have that. And then we get to, now we're really cooking here. And I think, I feel like that's the secret sauce of this episode, because I feel like the headline, or what initially kind of like sucks you in and is the big attention grabber, is the asteroid. Superman's flying into space to stop the asteroid. But then it's this personal struggle with the memory to figure out who he is. That's where this really gets cooking here. And I think what really just takes it to a whole other level.
And we still haven't lost the threat.
Yes.
So now it's expanded. There's 2 levels of tension, 2 levels of mystery and threat and jeopardy.
Yeah, they keep the ticking clock on it, which is important, because otherwise you would still want Superman to regain his memory, but it just wouldn't have that sense of urgency. So I know, I agree. I think it's so critical that they do that. So Jimmy is inside the apartment waiting for Clark. I love this too. I love the idea that the little brother, the pal, right? He's trying to help. He's inside the apartment waiting, and then Clark comes in. So, what's your take? Did Clark? He lands as Superman. He's very tired, very disoriented. He doesn't know what's going on. Out of instinct, out of reflex, he changes. Like there's enough residual memory before it's fully gone where he's like, he knows enough to change, right?
Right.
And then he found he has his wallet with his address.
I thought he just did this on muscle memory, because even I think a few seconds later, okay, I got to do this because this drives me nuts. The door to Clark's apartment is backwards. Like if you notice, right? Jimmy pushes the door open, basically pushes it into the person standing outside, or Clark unlocks it with his keys, but when you enter a door, you push it in. Here, it's backwards. And this door is the exact same door from the episode we recorded 2 weeks ago in Fairchild's apartment. the door in Fairchild's apartment, I mean, for the wood veneer and the molding, and this door to Clark's apartment are literally the same door.
Ah, good catch.
And they both work backwards. I mean, so if you were to ring the doorbell and someone they'd push the door right into you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this leads us to a very famous, I really think iconic moment where, again, Clark is very disoriented.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say, I don't think he looked at his address. I think he kind of, when he put the keys back in his pocket and he starts undoing, he goes, this seemed like the right place to come.
Yeah.
So I thought he was doing it on muscle memory, so to speak.
We'll go with that. I mean, that's, we're not told anything about he found paperwork of any kind. So I think that's in keeping with just kind of this like instinctual, residual memory that he might have that gets him there. But again, just very tired, very weary. And he starts to unbutton his shirt. And his back is to Jimmy, who's still by the door, and he's facing the camera. And you get, this has come up in a number of discussions. Unlike, I think, a lot of other iterations of Superman on screen, there's not a lot in Adventures of Superman of him in kind of the mid state of changing, where you have elements of the Clark Kent guys and the Superman costume. You don't get a lot of that. This is not a show where you get shirt rips like we see in a lot of other tellings. So I think that's part of the reason why this stands out so much. Like just this idea of him in his Clark Kent guise, but with the S exposed as he's standing there. And then, of course, in terms of the actual story, the fact that
Jimmy
all he needs to do is turn around and Jimmy will say,
yeah. And to your point, he's so fatigued. He's so exhausted. And we're going to see it in a couple of minutes. He's going to pass out, right? So he's just no energy, disoriented, totally weary. He could just, oh, thanks, Jimmy, and turn around. So there's that tension like, hey, is Jimmy going to see what's going on? Now, did you pick up the fact that this is a T-shirt? This was not, if you notice real carefully, it's a T-shirt. When he stretches, you can see his shoulder and his bare skin on both sides.
Oh, good catch. I didn't notice that specifically, but thank you for bringing that up. Next time I watch, I'll keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, that blew me away. So the fact that this was not the full long sleeve Superman, I guess
that would have been awfully hot.
Yeah, exactly. He probably figured, look, you guys are putting me through enough. The padding, I'm wearing a T-shirt on this one.
Yeah. I'm really overthinking this, but by the time in a couple of scenes, he's collapsed in the shower and then wakes up in the bed. At that point, it's very clear. He has no memory. It's who am I? Who are you? At this point, from the landing and getting in the car and now getting to the apartment, I mean, quote unquote, muscle memory or instinct aside, are the memories still fading? Like, does he still have something at this point? Like, or do you feel like, no, he's a blank slate even at this point?
I think the memories are incrementally fading.
Yeah.
And the fade is increasing with intensity. Because even like, I remember him putting the keys back in his suit pocket going, this seemed like the right place to come. So, but I think the amnesia or the mental impact amplifies, and also maybe the physical. Maybe it's a delayed reaction, the chemicals or whatever. So many factors. Just the force, the ballistic force of the collision with the asteroid.
Exactly. Like in that scene with Jimmy, if you had said, "Hey Clark, what's this guy's name?" I don't know that he would have been able to produce Jimmy, but I think there was still enough familiarity or recognition versus when he wakes up in bed later and it's full on like, who are you?
Right.
So I really think you get that. And I love the way George plays it. I mean, you really feel what he's going through as he's going through.
He conveyed exhaustion. You feel tired from a sympathetic level. He really conveyed the fact that he had the snot beaten out of him, right? And he's doesn't have his sea legs and he doesn't have any, incrementally he's getting more and more, he's losing his sharpness.
Yeah. And Jimmy's like, go take a hot shower. I'll go out and get us some coffee and sandwiches. Right. And so he leaves. And then we have Clark go into his bedroom and inadvertently, right, find the secret closet.
Oh, see, I thought that was muscle memory too.
Oh, I guess that's fair. Yeah. I think you're probably right.
I thought that was muscle memory. Because I thought he was still with it enough. Okay, Jimmy's coming back. Or this guy's going to bring coffee and sandwiches. I attributed that to muscle memory. Like, look, or maybe I just want to take a shower, so I'm going to hang this.
Or what? Well, that's the only thing. Was it that he was like just reaching to kind of brace himself? No, I see. I can't remember offhand right now. I go with the muscle memory. I think that's probably more interesting.
I go with that. Now, what surprised me here, and to your listeners, I had the pleasure and the honor of discussing the stolen costume with Anthony years ago. So now he's got more costumes in his secret closet, because in that one there was only one in the season 1 episode with Candy Myers and the gangsters.
So this is the costume thing that I wanted to talk about here, where not to be slaves to continuity or anything like that, but going back to season 1, 2 things. Number one, it is pretty clearly established that he only has the one costume. Again, that's why in the stolen costume, he has to go for his physical that day. That's why he leaves the costume in his closet, and that's what gets stolen. He has no costume for the episode. So much so that you get Clark racing to get the bad guys at the end.
Breaks a door down.
Exactly. So there's that. But then also going back to Superman on Earth, as he's leaving Smallville, Ma tells him she made him a costume from the blankets that he came to Earth in, right? So that the costume can't be torn or destroyed.
Right.
So here now he's got more. Like we've talked about in other episodes, is Ma still out there? Was there more material left over? Did she make him some more costumes? We don't know. And then I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but when we get to that conversation between Clark and Jimmy about, is it the costume that gives the powers? Now, I know this is an important point to make for the audience, especially for the kids, right? Like, it's not the costume that gives you powers, right? There's only, and the new tagline for our podcast this season, only Superman can do super things. But the costume does have properties because it's made from the blankets. But that's really ignored here. Like in this episode, it really just feels like they're just costumes that are made, and he's got multiple.
I agree for this episode. But it is at odds with everything I grew up with in the early 1960s. There was one costume. It had Kryptonian properties. It was invulnerable to heat and flame and all sorts of things.
Well, no, now in fairness, though, I'll walk my own words back a little bit. To Jimmy's credit, it's still not as if the costume made from the Kryptonian blankets gives him powers, like lets him fly, for example. It doesn't do that, but it does have its own properties. As opposed to the way Jimmy's talking about it, makes it sound more like, no, it's just fabric.
Right.
But yeah, I think the fact that there were multiples, that strikes us most of all, because we had a whole episode
where there was only one. And a secret closet.
But hey, you know what? No, I'm going to give the show the benefit of the doubt. Here's my take on it. After the stolen costume, he was like, damn it, I need more costumes.
That's I never thought of that.
And off screen, he goes back to the farm and he's like, Ma, you have any material left over? And she's probably taken too long to get the material. He's like, no, I need it now.
So when you're a showrunner, this is how you're going to fill those plot holes.
I've said this in a recent episode. If DC, and sadly, I don't know that they ever will, if they ever did a Superman 52 comic, a la Superman 78, set in the style and continuity that Christopher Reeve movies. Not that I would be the one to write it, but in my hypothetical dream scenario, I would just have a field day. There's so much stuff that I would want to do.
Oh, Boulder would be back.
Yes.
Colonel Redding, we'd see all those characters.
Yeah.
Now, that's interesting. The only thing that now you're forcing me to really, really take this apart. And again, I love this episode. We are quickly coming up on the only moment of time that I do not have suspension of disbelief. Give me a second, though. But these aren't costumes, Anthony. All I see are like 2 extra shirts. I don't see any trunks, any boots, I just see 2 extra shirts hanging in the.
I know, the tunic and the cape, like that's really the whole thing. But so he sees that, right? And obviously this will come into play later in that conversation with Jimmy when he's tasked with finding Superman, and it's like, I've got these Superman costumes. Like, am I Superman? Did I find the,
And the fascinating thing was the World's Finest 68, the story. Both that story and this episode really did raise the question of, what's the source of the powers? Is it the costume, or is it the being, the being that has the powers? Both of them wrestled with that. from a question standpoint.
You know, it's interesting. The two episodes that you and I have talked about now recently, the face and the voice, and now this, it's not the face, it's not the voice, it's not the costume, right? Like kind of this little bit of a theme here about like what actually makes Superman. It's not any of those things. It's who he is. And then that core, if we really, really get deep about it. But so again, he sees the costumes in the closet and then he takes a shower and Jimmy comes in with the coffee. Mr. Ken, I got coffee and sandwiches in the bag. Which I always say is that, I know I've talked about this before. Is that how you would transport coffee? Just in a bag? Anyway, so he goes to set it down. Then he hears a loud crash. And Clark is there, of course, no glasses, on the floor, the glass from the shower door just shattered in pieces around him. In our next scene, right, we have Perry and Lois showing up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Did I skip over?
No, you didn't. No, you're doing well.
So I don't know if I skipped over a trip to the observatory, but that's coming up later. So again, Jimmy sees Clark on the floor of the shower there, unconscious. And then in our next scene, we have Perry and Lois showing up. And off screen, Jimmy has somehow gotten Clark into pajamas, into bed.
We are now at the trigger point. And I love this episode. Oh my God, the drama, the heroics, the message, the sacrifice. But there's about 90 seconds from once you see Clark in the pajamas in the bed and the discussion thereafter. I lost all suspension of disbelief. Here's what drives me nuts. How the hell did Jimmy get this guy out of the broken glass on the ground? No cuts. How did he dry him off, get him dressed in pajamas? I mean, I don't think Jimmy has the strength to dry him off, towel him off, put him in pajamas, get him in bed. And then you got the other three coming in, all three of them. How did they not realize this is not Superman?
Okay, so let's table the glasses for a second here. This is so much fun. So we'll table the glasses for a second. So the fact that Jimmy acknowledges, like he verbally articulates, oh, like this guy weighs a ton. Like he acknowledges how much of a physical feat it was to get him into bed. And the fact that he marvels, not a scratch on him. He must be the luckiest guy alive. Does that help or hurt? To me, it helps, because I think if it were just completely unacknowledged, it's like, oh my God, like, come on, guys, like this is staring right at you. The fact that it's acknowledged and they're just kind of, well, it's not a matter of being oblivious with moving him. That's just, we have to suspend our disbelief that somehow Jimmy was able to do this. But with the glass, like the fact that they chalk it up to him being lucky, I don't know. I think it's better than it just being unacknowledged at all. What about you?
That's a good point. I think it would have been worse if they didn't make that comment.
And
right?
As far as moving him, again, it seems pretty clear that this guy was just like out cold and Jimmy moved it. But can we finagle it a little bit? Like maybe he was like helping a little bit, like to whatever extent he was drifting in and out of consciousness, he moved himself a little bit. I mean,
maybe
I agree that it's a stretch. Now,
I did like how Lois kind of goes, oh my God. Well, you keep going, because I'm cutting ahead a minute or two.
I want to talk about the conversation that they have, which is interesting. And there are a couple of beats in particular that really stand out. But the glasses, right? So again, not only is Clark without glasses when he's fallen in the shower, but then this entire conversation between Clark and the Daily Planet staff while Clark is in bed, he has no glasses on. Before I give my take, what is your, I guess you were already getting at this, but how do you feel about the fact that they can't recognize? Does this just totally take you out of the episode for a minute?
Now it does. When I originally watched this, I was more concerned about the drama and the jeopardy and the risk to the planet. And then the amnesia and how will he recover and how will he solve this? But here, now that I've seen this like 3 times, I'm much more conscious of the fact that how can the three of you not recognize him? So this now that I've seen this same episode like back to back, it takes me out of the episode for maybe a few seconds.
Okay, so now I'm going to make an argument for what the show does here, okay? I'm going to defend Adventures of Superman and this scene in particular, because here's the thing. And I think people are probably of different mindsets about this, not just in this series, but when we talk about the glasses disguise generally. What I kind of like about this is it shows it's not just the glasses. I mean, yes, it is a huge stretch that they would see him like that and not make the connection, especially in this particular version where he legit looks different. We've had other instances. I mean, maybe Lois and Clark is a good example where Dean Cain with the glasses or without the glasses, it's like, he still looks the same. But I swear, with George Reeves, I mean, it really does change the look of his face. Like, I feel like there's a pretty stark difference. I mean, it's not like you can't tell them apart, but he really does look different. So that undermines my argument a little bit. However, my larger point is this. I think it shows it's not just the glasses. And I think this holds true for other tellings of the character too. There's a miniseries called American Alien, which we talked about on Digging for Kryptonite. And there's a whole bit where Pete Ross, who knows Clark's secret, comes to visit Clark in Metropolis after he's become Superman. And he's like, do people ever, like, what if you don't have, like, what if you don't have your glasses? And he's like, I take my glasses off all the time. You know what people say to me? You look like Superman. And again, just kind of this idea of like, it's not only the glasses. Now, again, I'll undermine my argument again. George Reeves doesn't do much else in his performance to differentiate them. But when we look at other versions of the character on screen and in the comics, like, there are other things at play that I think are accounting for why people don't put this together in terms of how he stands and his voice and just the overall behavior. Yeah. Even if we're not talking about like the clumsy, bumbling Christopher Reeve, even in more subtle versions. But most importantly, it's the fact that people aren't necessarily looking. They're just not looking for it. And now I'll undermine my argument for a third time, because in this version of the show, they are. A lot of times.
Right. Yeah, see,
so I know, I understand my argument is not ironclad.
I telegraphed that because I was going to say that, because one of the plot elements is Lois is always trying to connect. Clark is Superman, you know?
Yeah. Now, we haven't really gotten into that business much on in these episodes that we've covered so far. I know that becomes more of a thing, I guess, moving forward. So I'm not saying my argument is perfect.
Some of those even in season 1. Well, maybe I am Superman at the end of... Yeah,
some of those, like, kind of like winking sly remarks. But again, all to say that it's a huge stretch. It's kind of crazy. It's also kind of crazy that the show did that. And part of me wonders, was that on purpose? Or was it like, part of me is like, did they just forget to play?
or are they just figuring, you know what? We're going to move this so fast. People, like, I didn't dwell on it the first time I ever watched. I was more concerned with how are they going to get this, get Superman back to his normal personality and strength level and have him heal and address the problem. So I overlooked it the first go around. I will say, I do know that this, even in season 1, there were a few times when Phyllis Coates tried to connect, hey, maybe you are Superman. And later in some of the other seasons, Noel Neill did that too. But what, and I'm sorry to leap ahead, at the very end of this episode, Superman's at the observatory with all of them, right? And he's talking, oh, goodbye all, and okay, Professor Roberts, I got it. He's going to take the bomb up there. Didn't you guys look at him then? Didn't he look a lot like Clark?
Well, it's so, I'll jump ahead too, because there's the scene later where Perry tasks Clark, who still doesn't have his memory, with finding Superman. And he says something to the effect of, oh, what does he look like? Or do you know what he looks like? It's like, I was dying for Jimmy to be like, he kind of looks like you
even
without
Jimmy's
glasses.
Aunt. What was the second episode?
The Haunted Lighthouse.
Aunt Louisa. Say, and then Clark fumbles his way out of it.
Again, all in all, with him not having the glasses in this scene, it's just, to me, it's surprising that the series, put him in that scene without his glasses. Like, why even invite this conversation? You know what I mean? Because it would have been easy enough for, why wouldn't Jimmy put his glasses on him after he's put on his pajamas, right? Like, Clark wears glasses. It would stand to reason he would put on Clark's glasses. So that's kind of odd that the show would even invite this. But like I said, even though there are holes in this argument, asteroid-sized holes in this argument, I'm still going to kind of land on the side of, I think it just shows it's not just the glasses. There's more to why people don't put this together. Or we'll go back to my headcanon, which I know really just doesn't hold water here, and I know that, but that they all know. They all know who he is.
And they don't admit it.
They're just going along with it.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating just to kind of see this. And then what really stood out to me, and I'm sure it did to you as well, because we talk so much about how confident and authoritative and forceful this Clark is. Clark with no memory is very mild, timid almost, Very soft.
hesitant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even like, is that, he's so almost not apologetic, but
But just like, who do I know you? Like, there's just like this softness to him that like Clark normally doesn't have.
right. He doesn't have he's not the driven, purposeful, decisive. He's very soft spoken and almost kind of, I don't want to say bewildered, but he's out of his element. Now, he is very soft spoken. Is that who I am? Do I know you? Do you know me? And you could tell he's attracted to Lois. Like, who are you?
That stood out to me. I was like, you horn dog. Look at this guy. This guy's got no memory. He's got to get carried and dressed by Jimmy Olsen, but he looks at Lois and he's like, who are you?
Now, the other thing that really stood out to me was what a jerk Perry was. He was so abusive, and just so unwarrantedly mean. And what I also wonder, if I may, why did you guys get a doctor? Right?
I know.
Call Tom.
I mean, yeah, no kidding, right? Like we just had this whole episode, The Face and the Voice, with his close personal friend and Dr. Tom. Where's this guy? I mean, there is a line in the scene at the Daily Planet of like, shouldn't we have just taken him to a doctor? There's no time, like something to that effect.
Yeah, but I need a newspaper editor.
And I think they even do say in the scene by the bed, like, why did you call?
Yeah.
So again, like Jimmy makes that initial call. I can kind of go along with it, but at that point they needed to bring a doctor. But I'm with you. So Perry says two things in this episode, in this scene that drove me nuts.
Mean.
First, when he's like, amnesia, it's not possible. It's not possible? Well, have you never heard of this? Like this is something that can happen. But then he accuses Clark of essentially pretending, of playing a joke. It's like, is Clark known for that? I mean, now, again, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I think this was Perry in denial more than anything else. I think this was him not wanting the gravity of the situation to be the case.
Interesting.
Right? Because that's a pretty big problem if your guy, your star reporter here and your friend is suffering from this.
Is benched, is on the sidelines.
So I think as much as I don't love Perry in this scene, and it's kind of like, again, says it's not possible. Clearly it is. He accuses Clark of playing a joke. It's like, why would he do that? It's like clearly seems pretty serious and legitimate, but yeah, maybe it is more of like he's just in denial about it. I can go with that.
That's a good way of positioning it. I mean, I hadn't thought about that. I will say a few scenes later when they go back to the planet and Perry walks him down. See the name on the door? It's your door. There, everything's fixed.
Yeah, I know. They really don't know how this works, I suppose. But no, I'm going to go with my reading on Perry because otherwise he's just a dick. So it's like if there's more kind of behind it, I can go with it.
Okay, that's based on everything we know. And you know what? I don't feel bad. I'm telling the truth. That scene after Clark was removed from the shower and put in the bed, when he spoke to Perry and Jimmy and Lois, and they didn't realize he was Superman. That was the only thing that jarred me out of the episode. But again, I love this episode just because of the consequences and all the forces at play and the drama and the risk.
Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Creator and podcaster Perry Constantine, host of Superhero Cinephiles, has a special offer for listeners of this podcast. Visit percivalconstantine.com/DFK or click the link in the show notes. Fill out the form and then get 2 free novels and 1 free superhero short story. The novels are Vanguard, Heroes Forged, an Avengers-inspired team of superheroes, and Ronin Born, a cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic, fascist Japan. The short story is Omega Knights, Fire and Lightning, a Power Rangers-inspired prequel to an upcoming serial. Take advantage of this offer today, and be sure to catch Superhero Cinephiles on all major podcast platforms. Yeah, my placement might be off, but there is another scene at the observatory where Roberts and his associate talk about how there's going to be this conference.
Oh, and is this the scene where Roberts and Perry prove their kindred spirits?
Well, we're getting to that.
Oh.
But there is a scene at the observatory. But then we're back at the Daily Planet where they're, much like what Lois and Clark will do in its telling of this, the idea is bring Clark to the planet, like have him kind of go through the routine and the motions and be in a familiar place, and maybe that will jog his memory. And obviously that's not the case, but they're walking him around. There's actually another employee there out at a desk. Jimmy's like, hey, remember that time when blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, and I spilled the ink.
Right? But then Perry comes and, he doesn't fill them in. So we don't have all of the details yet, but we'll get it in that subsequent scene in his office. But he needs Clark to find Superman because in the past, Clark has proven successful at this, and they need Super. And again, he's cagey about why, but like they need him to find Superman. That's where we get that line of like, what does he look like? Where I was dying.
I'll go downstairs.
But that, oh my God, when he's like, okay, I'll go down. I'll read up everything I can. I'll study real hard. I'll ask everyone I see.
Maybe we should put an ad in the paper. Okay.
He's like,
enough. You just sit and take it easy.
Yeah.
Cover the plant show, the flower show with Jimmy.
With who? With who? Because
Jiminy.
I was
Jiminy.
dying with that. We talk about like how quickly they film the show and they don't have it's like,
Jiminy.
Just go with it. Why don't you cover the flower show with Jiminy? It was great, but I loved, God, he was so good in this whole episode, but especially this scene like that innocence of, okay, well, I'll go read.
You know what I'll do? I'll go downstairs and I'll look through all the files and I'll ask everyone I know if they know him. And, maybe we should put an ad in the paper. He was soft-spoken.
Yeah. Oh, God. It was so good. But then we go to, and then essentially they say, like, why don't you just rest? But we're now in Perry's office, and he's there with Lois and Professor Roberts. And now we're getting more about what threat still remains, right? The fact that the asteroid is there, it's interfering with the gravitational forces on the planet, right? There's a tidal wave and other events that are occurring.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Perry gets a report from the Cairo Bureau of the Daily Planet. They really live up to their name of the Daily Planet, but they're everywhere. And this is where we have, so now we know, like, so Roberts needs Superman, right? Because this threat is not averted. The fact that the asteroid is floating around is a problem. And
before this, they were back at the observatory, and Professor Roberts comes out on the deck, and the young assistant there is having a cigarette, and he says, "What do you think they're going to call it? They're going to call it Superman's moon?" And Professor Roberts shows what a kindred spirit he is with you. Don't be so stupid.
Oh, but then in the scene, I agree with you. And then in the scene in Perry's office, he's barking at Lois.
Yeah. How would I know? It could change the whole universe. How would I possibly know? Just get Superman. Yeah. Yeah. So much for your scientific degrees. But the professor reminded me of just the curmudgeon, the crankiness of Perry, when his assistant innocently says, "You think they'll name it Planet Superman or something?" Don't be so stupid. We don't just.
Yeah, I know. I guess more of that, shades of his character from the Evil 3, it's coming through a little bit. But this now leads us to, perhaps the most, well, there's a lot that really stands out and that is memorable, but perhaps the most memorable aspect of this episode here, this scene in the apartment. So kind of have a couple of stages to it. So first, we have Clark, taking out the costume and looking at it. He brings it out into the living room. Then he hears the knock at the door from Jimmy, and so he stashes the costume under the couch, the seat cushion, and he sits down, and Jimmy comes in. And this is where they have this conversation, right? Where he asks, like, well, suppose someone else found the costume?
Do you think the costume has the powers? And I don't know, and you probably know from some of the readings you've done, I don't know if this is just an urban myth, but there was a lot of concern at the time in the 50s that little kids were going to put on a cape and play Superman and jump off the garage roof or something like that. And there was a lot of concern. So I thought this was more a powerful, clear message from the producers. No, it's not the costume, right? Because there was that few seconds when Clark asked Jimmy, what if someone else had the costume? Do you think they'd have the powers? And Jimmy emphatically goes, no, it's not the costume. Only Superman has the superpowers. But they had that same question, that same line of thinking in the World's Finest 68. And Clark kind of thought, well, I guess Superman loaned me his costume, so I guess I might as well stop the asteroid.
Yeah, I know. That's not articulated here exactly what's going through Clark's mind, like whether he legit thinks like, okay, I might be Superman, but I need the costume to do this versus, I have the costume.
I have the innate ability.
And I have to either get them to the real Superman or I can put them on and I could use it because it'll give me powers. Like, I don't know exactly what he's thinking in that exact moment.
They explored it more in the comic book, I think.
But and that is our new tagline, right? Only Superman can do super things. And I don't know exactly, but I would imagine that was probably a message to the kids out there. And, it's fine. Late last night, I was like 1:30 in the morning. I was finishing up the Lois and Clark All Shook Up episode. And my almost 5-year-old son couldn't sleep. And I hear him coming down the stairs. And I was like, hey, what are you doing? And he was like, what are you watching? I'm like, Superman. I was like, you want to? And he sat and he watched the second half of the Lois and Clark episode, including the scene where you have Jonathan and Martha with Clark, who doesn't remember who he is, out on the balcony, and they push him. And this is not the first time I have made this point when we're talking about Superman. I was like, they only did that because they know he's Superman. I was like, that, right? Like, only Superman can do that. Because and honestly, I don't remember this specifically, but my mother tells me this story all the time of like, because we lived in an apartment building until I was 8 with a balcony. And I would run around in my Superman costume, and she would always tell me, like, you can't fly, right? Like, and so we went through, so it is a thing. So the fact that the show would make that point.
Yeah, I remember hearing stuff like this, just apocryphal, like kids were. And we even saw pictures of little Superman costumes with George Reeves and the kids at like department stores and stuff. So the urban legend was kids were jumping off garage roofs and stuff like that, thinking they could fly if they had a cape on.
Yeah. So he goes, Superman explained it to me once. Only Superman can do super things.
Not the costume. Yeah.
So he kicks Jimmy out. And this leads to really the big moment here. Do you want to take it?
This is my favorite. There's probably 45 seconds or 1 minute, which is so profoundly well done. Because Clark has been leading up to it, right? And he's wrestling. He's trying to figure out, who am I? Who am I? And he's struggling. So what was fascinating was, I didn't realize it until I watched it just last weekend. But it starts out with Clark in the Superman costume with his glasses on, which only amplifies the confusion in identity. But it goes further because it cuts to a scene at the mirror where the image is inverted, which only amplifies, subliminally, amplifies confusion even more. You're more disoriented. Wait, the S is backwards. Then you realize he's in the mirror. To your listeners, Clark is kind of walking around his apartment. He's got his Superman costume on, but his Clark Kent glasses. And you can see he's just really vexed and confused. And he's like testing his muscles like, do I have super muscles? You could just see the conflict he was going through.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to what we were saying before, this combination of guises, the fact that he's in the costume with the glasses, you never see him like that on this show.
And I'll say two things, and you very graciously let me speak about it. This is my most favorite. This is the most powerful, this 45 seconds or this 1 minute, when he is conflicted and you've got this collision of two identities just in total conflict. He conveys it well with the stress on his face. But it's my most favorite scene in this, and it's a credit to his acting ability. Just the stress he's experiencing.
And he sits down, and in frustration, he pounds the table next to the chair, and it shatters. And he gets up, And he takes the glasses off and he has this moment of realization.
Professor Roberts.
Yeah, the observatory. And he's off. And, one of the things that I know we have a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are fans of Adventures of Superman and like only Adventures of Superman. And that's totally fine. What I love about being kind of a fan and a student of the mythology is seeing the different takes and what undercurrent remains throughout, but also what different directions we can go in. That Lois and Clark episode, I really enjoyed. Again, it was such a great update to this story because it tapped into the cast and the dynamics of that iteration. And in particular, my favorite aspect of that episode is that you have Jonathan and Martha, who are part of Clark's life on that show. And they show up. And when they realize that Clark doesn't know he's Superman, they show him the costume. Jonathan takes a bat and he's like, this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. And he hits Clark with it and it shatters and his hands are shaking, from the force. And Clark's still not with it. And then they're watching on the news because, again, the threat of the asteroid is still out there. And the government fires like a nuke at it and it misses. Misses by a lot, it seems. And, Jonathan, he turns off the TV. And this is my favorite moment of that entire episode. And he's like, the world needs you, son. He goes, you're the only one who can do this. You're the only one who can do this. And it's so, again, the simplicity and the purity of this, but it's just like, it's you, like you got to get it together. And that leads us to that scene on the balcony where they're trying to, Martha's like, well, when you fly, you kind of put your arms like this and he can't get it together. I mean, what's interesting there is like, he is told, like explicitly told, you're Superman, but like he can't figure out how, like, yeah. And he doesn't know how to fly. Like he just, it's not a thing. Until he remembers, and their attempt is to push him, to push him off the building, and he crashes. And then, like I said, tapping into what that show is about, the love story between Lois and Clark. Lois finds him on the street, and they have this great conversation where he asks her to tell him about Superman, and she's like, it's like, yeah, he's good and he's good looking, but it's not that. It's like he gets things done, like he tries. And then all of a sudden, the memories start flooding back. So I love the role that his parents play. But then ultimately it was that conversation with Lois that really crystallized everything for him.
Cool.
Which is different, right? Like here, it's far more of a solitary journey that he has to go on to figure this out. And I think there's value in both.
What did you say? What type of journey?
I said solitary.
Oh, okay. I was going to say it's all self.
Yeah.
It's limited. Solitary is perfect. One thing I will say, there's times I've read certain comics that are classics. But there's something that George Reeves did here. There was no thought balloons. There was no speech. What he conveyed with his face, just the angst and the anxiety and the stress, I was just so impressed with. Kudos to him. And it was more powerful than a panel in whether the best artist in the world did it. Only the actual walking around of Reeves showed that conflict.
And that's why. Like, again, I love the Lois and Clark version and it's bouncing off of all these other people, but there's something just captivating and enthralling by watching George alone in that apartment, staring at himself in the mirror with the glasses, banging the table, and then all of it clicking in. And I did not reread the Menace from the Stars for this, but I have read it in the past, and you and I have talked about it in the past. And I remember what my take on it was, which was, it's fine, but when you take George's performance and the music and all of the other things that we're talking about.
It's 100,000 times better on the TV show.
Yeah, you lose, I think, what makes this so magical. So he has this moment, Professor Roberts, the observatory, and he flies off and he lands at the observatory. And the plan now is there's this bomb that they've devised, but it needs to be flown to the asteroid, planted, and then 2 switches need to be flipped before this will work. And once again, we get kind of this callback to just a chance. Like they don't know if this will work and if he'll survive.
Yeah, right. There's no certitude.
And he essentially says goodbye to all of them. I love, though, it's like, goodbye, Lois, everyone else. It's like 2 other people.
I noticed that.
It's like 2 other people. It's like, Gilligan's Island, right? In the first season or whatever, and the rest. It's like 2 other people.
Right,
names, and then eventually they did. But
and he does say goodbye to Lois and everyone else.
And everyone else. God damn it. It's like Jimmy dragged your naked body out of the shower and dressed you. You could say his name.
Yeah.
At this point, though, just like I think it's the flip, the reverse of what we saw of the memory gradually going away. I don't think he fully has it back at this point, because he has a line when he's planting the bomb on the asteroid. He's like, "Whoever I am."
Right. I noticed that. I noticed that well, we'll see what happens. Whoever I am, something like that before he hits the second switch. But wasn't there something at the absolute end when Clark says the second explosion restored his memory?
Yeah, when we get to that final scene in the planet where he's typing up his story and Lois is reading it, I don't know. Does he say that Superman had amnesia? I think it's like that Superman was injured or affected, and so I don't know that they explicitly say amnesia. I'd have to go back and watch it.
Yeah, I'm stumbling, but I do remember.
But that was the idea. The theory that Clark puts forth on Superman's behalf is that the first blast did something, and the second blast restored him.
Right.
Again, my memory is, I don't think he said that Superman had amnesia too. I think it was more like an injury or affected in some way.
I thought it was something like his memory came back. The second explosion helped. With the second explosion, his memory came back.
Yeah. But anyway, like that's what we're so again, at this point where he's at the observatory, like he doesn't fully know who he is. I guess he knows enough. I think it's that kind of like that instinctive, like he knows where to go, and the last major thing that he was doing with Professor Roberts, he knows to go there. And whereas the first time at the observatory when he flies off, it's just him and Roberts. It really adds a whole other flavor here that you've got our cast, except for poor Henderson. But, side note, Henderson's not gotten a lot of play in season 2 so far. I mean, he pops up in a few, but not a lot. Anyway.
Yeah. But there were times about this time, the actor that played Henderson was called in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. And that one thing with Betamillion Butler, the reason they had a different actor play the police guy was Henderson was testifying or was being questioned. So he was off the grid a little bit.
Right. But having our other three there, really, again, amplified things. And so he flies off again. He lands on the asteroid. I thought the lighting was cool when he landed. It felt a little otherworldly, a little bit, when he first lands on the asteroid. Then it just looks like the mountainous area. Desert. And I don't mean to nitpick, but they couldn't have cut out the sounds of the birds chirping. You don't see them, I don't think, unless I totally.
No, you don't. You hear them.
I mean, let's, just snip that out. Anyway, it ruins the illusion a little bit. But anyway, this is where he plants the bomb. He flips the switches. He has those lines that we talked about, like, hope this works, whoever I am. And it does. The ending, I feel like they ran out of time here. The ending here was so quick, abrupt, from the quick blast to him flying. You get that quick shot of him flying towards the camera, like over Metropolis, and then Clark typing up the story in the Daily Planet.
Right.
And there, Lois says something to the effect of, like, how does he know all of this about Superman?
Well, just knock me on the head, maybe.
Well, he says, like, I know who he is now, which, I mean, it's funny because, like, my read on it is that he means, like, he doesn't have amnesia. And before, he didn't know when they said, who's Superman? How do I find him? Now he knows. But Lois takes it more like, what his identity is.
I agree.
And that's where he has this line about, well, knock me over the head sometime, I'll tell you.
Correct. I do agree. It seemed like ever since flip the second switch, explosion, and then maybe 30 seconds in Clark's office at the typewriter.
Yeah. We're talking about, no one can recognize him without the glasses. And then this line from Lois about, you know who he really is. Like, tell me. This is the one thing where I feel like the show is at war with itself in a way, because going back to what I was saying before, you can buy that they don't recognize him even without the glasses, because it's not just the glasses. It's that they're not looking for it. But the show makes the point so many times that they are looking for it. And I wish they didn't, because then they really do look dumb. Right? Like, that's the problem. If they're not looking for it and they're not seeing it, it's like, okay, like you're kind of like willfully blind to this. But if you're actively trying, then it's like, what's going on?
It contradicts. Yeah. I never knew that one thing you alluded to, that story with Pete Ross, when he goes, I just say, a lot of people say I look like him, and brush it off that way. But this was, I think, one of the tropes of the early 50s and the comic book stories with Siegel and Schuster and all the way up through the 70s, where Lois and others were trying to prove Clark and, trying to prove Clark and Superman were the same person.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do complain about it from time to time, but I recognize it's a thing and I go along with it. It's fine. But, before we kind of wrap up here, especially in terms of the Superboy telling and, honestly, I kind of said everything I needed to about the Lois and Clark version, but was there anything else about that Superboy Lost episode? Because I know you had said you wanted to talk about it more at the end. I don't know if we already hit on it.
My only point was...
about living a different life.
No, my only point was you said it probably better than I could have, that the correlation between what happened in this 1950s episode where the girl in the jalopy picks him up and then what took place in the Superboy thing where it was intriguing where when he had amnesia, where he interacts with a total stranger. And you said it better than I could have, that, could some of the writers for the Superboy series have watched this and go, hey, it'd be kind of intriguing if he had this interaction with this woman while he had amnesia.
I know. Well, I could ask Mike Carlin. Maybe I will. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm glad that I finally watched the Superboy version and rewatched the Lois and Clark version. Smallville did an episode where Clark lost his memory, but it was not asteroid related. And while he had amnesia, Rich, you will be shocked to learn that he fell in love with Lana Lang all over again.
Wait, say this. I'm sorry. There's a comment I was going to make. Which thing did he? Was this?
I thought you were doing a bit. No, I was saying Smallville also did an episode where Clark lost his memory, but it was not asteroid related.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I thought you said Superboy.
No.
Okay. No, I didn't make the connection with Smallville.
But also, I want to give a shout out our buddy Rob O'Connor, who's been on the show and actually was on the show recently for the Defeat of Superman. He and his co-host Alan on their podcast, All Star Superfan, one of their earliest episodes, they did a look at Panic in the Sky, Superboy Lost, and All Shook Up. So if anyone's looking for, I guess, like more of a breakdown or comparison, I encourage you guys to check that out. What else have we not talked about that you want to talk about with Panic in the Sky?
I'll say, if I may, to try to hit it real crisply in 20 seconds, there are three things on this one that I love. To their credit, very unique from a special effects standpoint, and that really adds to it. That and the music, there's such great synergy. And they were so famous for reusing the same footage over and over and over. How many times we see Clark run into the alley and come out? Even that one thing when the gangster lady filmed it. How could you guys not see this, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so putting their money out there and doing special effects that enhance this was great. The heroics with Superman. At both times, there was never a guarantee or certitude that he'd survive. So he was willing to sacrifice for the greater good and protect life. But again, that 45 seconds when he's walking around the apartment, I was just so impressed with Reeves' acting ability. He sold the stress and the conflict and the confusion on identity. Who am I? And what I do wonder is, was there anything going on here where he might have been talking to the director and go, you know what? Let me smash the table. Or did he do something where, look, get a few shots of me being confused wearing the glasses and the costume. I wonder how much he brought, or from a collaborative sense, how much input or feedback he had.
Oh, that's a good question. And I echo all of the things you said. And those are all reasons why I love this. I think it holds up great. It was so much fun to rewatch. Again, for all of the reasons that you said. And yeah, I mean, that scene of him in particular trying to figure all of it out. Like I've been saying, and especially when we talked about Face and the Voice and here again, I mean, these are kind of the emotional stakes and that personal quest, personal journey and struggle that I crave in any story, really, and especially in this show. And to get it in such a powerful way, I do think it earns its title of best of the series. But again, with Face and the Voice, like really right there. And honestly, on any given day, I think I could probably go with one or the other. So people shouldn't sleep on Face and the Voice. But Panic in the Sky, really, it truly is a standout episode. And to your point, especially about investing and the budget and special effects for this, they didn't need to do this episode. You know what I mean? Like we said, it is an outlier. Had this episode not existed and we just got one of our more quote unquote standard Adventures of Superman episodes, we couldn't begrudge them for it. But the fact that they had the ambition to do something on this scale, I really do give them a lot of credit. And with respect to George Reeves, I wanted to say this because I don't know that I would ever do an episode on his passing. There's a lot of material out there for people who are curious about reading about what happened or might have happened. It's out there. Kind of where I land on this, and this is such a momentous episode of the series. I feel like this is a good time to sort of say this. Kind of where I land on this is that how George passed is ultimately unknowable, especially with the passage of time and the passing away of people who were involved. I don't think that we could ever definitively know exactly what happened. I think there's enough sort of questionable business about the crime scene where if it turned out that something had happened to him, I would believe it. But at the same time, kind of the old adage that sometimes the simplest, most obvious solution is the answer. And so if it turned out that he did die by his own hand, I could understand that as well. So again, I don't know that I would necessarily have much more to say about it than that. I think the more important point is that it was an untimely, tragic end, right? That's either way, it's an untimely, tragic end. And it's such a shame that, he wasn't around to make a cameo in Superman the movie, right?
Well
like
said.
Kirk Allen was.
Well said.
Or to see, and I know he saw it at the time and did so many visits and appearances and things like that, but especially over the decades to see how much love and appreciation all of these generations have had for Adventures of Superman. And again, we just talked about the face and the voice, and we talked about this. And look, his performance in all the episodes, it's always great. It's always a highlight. But in these episodes in particular, you see him operating at such a great level. And I know I said this in the other episode, but it's like to whatever extent he had any misgivings or mixed feelings. And I do think to an extent that has been overblown. He was set to come back for another season of Adventures of Superman. He had started directing. I think that might have been a bit overblown, but to whatever extent he had any mixed feelings, any misgivings about this, like I said before, I hope I hope he's proud of these performances because they hold up and they're magnificent. And I think, these episodes, this episode in particular, goes a long way towards showing why the show has meant so much to people for so long.
Well said. Tremendously well said.
So on that note, we're going to take a break for a little while of the podcast. We will be back with the rest of our season 2 coverage after Labor Day, but we're going to go on hiatus now after this episode for the rest of the summer, take a little break, bank up episodes, and then we'll start releasing them after Labor Day. So over the summer, we'll be on hiatus. I encourage you, catch up on any episodes you might have missed. I suspect this Panic in the Sky episode might be one where we have some first-time listeners or people who don't listen regularly but kind of pop in and out. If that's you, please go back, check out any of our past episodes, especially the ones with Rich Roney. He's been on a bunch, but any of our episodes from seasons 1 or 2. I also host another show called Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. We're currently in the midst of heavy Superboy coverage. It's been a lot of fun. So there's a lot out there to listen to, and I hope that folks will. And then again, come back here after Labor Day as we get into season 2, episode 13, The Machine That Could Plot Crimes. Before we sign off, Rich, anything else that you want to say?
Thank you so much for having me. I loved this episode. I love what we did 2 weeks ago. Couldn't add any more to it. This was just so energizing and so wonderful. I truly had a blast. So I thank you very, very much. Audience, I appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you again soon. And until then, in the words of Jimmy Olsen, remember, only Superman can do super things. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a weekly exploration of Superman's vast 85-year mythology, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.